So we have with us a panel of speakers. We have Maya Sharma from NDTV. Hello, ma'am. We have Jahnavi Phalkey from Science Gallery, Bengaluru. We have Ananyo Bhattacharya, who's authored a very nice book on John von Neumann. We have Devangshu Datta from Juggernaut Books. And we are really looking forward to this panel to discuss the launch of book fellowships by the ISF. And I'm going to open it up for Maya to take over, please.
Thank you so much. Well, books on science. The excitement of science, I mean, it's there in the research, it's there in the discovery. Is this excitement, though, being shared and communicated enough outside of research and academic circles? Here in India, do we have enough access to engaging in well-written books on this research, on the discoveries that scientists are no doubt making, on the personalities that are working in these fields? Do we really have that happening right now? Or is there a kind of divide between the work being done by scientists and the rest of us civilians? Do we not quite know what's going on? Very happy to have here today a panel which is definitely equipped to talk about this. We have two writers, Jahnavi Phalkey from the Science Gallery of Bengaluru, a filmmaker and historian of science and technology, formerly at King's College of London, and now you're founding director of Science Gallery in Bengaluru. And the author, in this context, of Atomic State, Big Science in 20th Century India. Lovely to have you here. Ananyo Bhattacharya, also a scientist turned journalist, a scientist turned chronicler of science. He's a science writer who has worked at The Economist and also at Nature. The author of The Man from the Future on John von Neumann, which he himself describes as on the geeky end of things when it comes to books. We'll have to discover that. And Devangshu Datta, of course, playing a very vital role, the publishing role from Juggernaut Books. He's a commissioning editor for non-fiction at Juggernaut and also consulting editor at Business Standard, where he oversees the coverage of science and technology. So we've got writers and we've got Devangshu as the gateway as well. Now to start with, I'm just going to ask a quick question of each of you, and you can give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or somewhere in between. Jahnavi, do we have enough exciting, well-written books on science for the general public?
Where the operative word is enough.
No. Ananyo, I know you're a visitor to this country, but from what you've seen?
Yeah, exactly. I can't call myself an expert, but from what I'm seeing, and we had some excellent book talks and so on, there isn't as much enthusiasm for the books, and as not as many books as there should be, I think. So.
Not as many as there should be. Devangshu, is it yours?
Huge unfulfilled demand. No way is there, forget about enough. I would say that you could expand the market by a factor of 19, 20, 25
Wow.
easily, given unfulfilled demand.
Okay, so clearly the agreement here that there are just not enough books out there on science for the general audience. Let's try and figure out why this is. Jahnavi, your book deals a lot with the history of the development of nuclear physics, nuclear science in India, and the interaction of scientists with the state. Usually when we talk about the history of a country, we talk about the wars, we talk about the politics. We don't talk much about the science, the scientific discovery, the scientists. Why do you think this is, and do you think it's a huge miss?
It most certainly is a huge miss, especially when you look at 20th century history. So often when I would talk to my students, and now I talk to my colleagues about this, before the Second World War, there was no country with ministries for science and technology. Okay. After the Second World War, there's no country without one, right? And so the nature of politics itself has, through the 20th century, changed. So if you look at the First World War and the use of poison gases and Fritz Haber, and then, the changing sort of state commitment to science. And, one of the moments, if you want to mark, is, one of the many moments, if we wish to mark in the 20th century, is, for example, when John F. Kennedy said, it is now our mission to put a man on the moon. It's a state mission to put a man on the moon, which is, in effect, driven by progress in science and progress in technology, not necessarily, in a linear manner. And so that relationship has changed. And so I think we cannot any longer entertain writing histories where the purpose of state, reason of state, abilities of state, capacity of state, also for governance. I mean, you look at today with digital governance, you look at UID, right? So if you start looking at these apparatuses that are so integral to governance, to government, to the state, then how can you write histories of politics without looking at this, without looking at science and technology? I mean, even if one were interested in it cynically, you cannot any longer look at electoral politics without looking at looking at the work of Cambridge Analytica, for example, right?
Okay, all right, yes.
And so I think, this work, for especially starting the 20th century, we cannot write political, social histories without histories of science and technology.
So history of science, an absolutely vital and probably neglected area, absolutely.
I think so.
Ananyo, your book on John von Neumann, who you said you kind of kept coming across in different areas, different fields. This is, of course, it's about his work, it's about his ideas, but it's also largely about the man himself. And this biography of these figures in science and mathematics, how important is it to tell their stories in order to engage the audience and maybe generate a great interest in science itself?
That's, I just wanted to say I agree totally with what you said. I think when we come to write the history of the last 10 years, if you don't mention COVID and the science and the arguments between the scientists internally and also externally with politicians, that's not going to be a history, is it? Yes. So I think clearly that engagement with the science has got to change. And whilst nominally I wrote what looks like a biography, I think what it really is a sort of history of ideas. It follows the ideas of this one man right up until the present day and shows how something as seemingly harmless as mathematics has actually changed our lives profoundly, something seemingly abstract. So the machines that we all carry around in our pockets nowadays, those run on the von Neumann architecture. And that's because in 1946, this mathematician wrote a report which was widely circulated about how to design a programmable computer. And as a result of that, all of the computers pretty much that you're likely to use in your lifetime are still based on his blueprint.
Wow.
Now, and that's not the only thing, that's not the only area of your lives he's affected, because he was involved with atom bombs. He was called into the atom bomb project. He helped escalate the US ICBM program and the way nuclear strategists think about whether, for example, India should bomb Pakistan, or what do we do if Putin bombs the Ukraine, should the US and NATO retaliate? All of those things tend to still now be rooted in game theory, which he invented, right, in 1920, and followed up in the 1940s. So I think it's not just about celebrating individuals.
Okay.
I think we find that very easy to do in a way, but it's almost alienating sometimes to imagine, then you think, well, we can leave it to these clever guys, right?
There's one individual hero or those small group of...
That's right, and science nowadays is such a complex and highly funded and highly collaborative effort, right? So in my book I wanted to portray some of that, but I think, we should think and kind of sometimes worry and sometimes just be in awe of the ideas that that have been generated. So I think awe is a very good sort of emotion, whether it's positive or negative, for a science book to kind of capture.
Absolutely. Your book also talks about several different personalities, not just one hero or one person advancing the cause of science.
I was very averse to the idea.
Yeah, or just one person, yes. You did speak about there being maybe a huge scope for expansion of science books. But as a publisher, as somebody looking into non-fiction books in particular, is there as much appetite, as much demand for non-fiction books as there is for fiction? Or do you find it a challenge to actually sell those?
Okay, without getting into proprietorial data, over the last 3 or 4 years, non-fiction, and by that I mean non-fiction, non-textbooks,
Yes. Yeah.
have far overtaken fiction in terms
Really?
of...
Okay, that's
yes.
good to know. That's good to know.
In terms of at least English language publishing.
And not getting into private data, but why? Why do you?
I suppose it's... I'm reaching here for explanations,
Yeah.
but I suppose it's because a lot of Indians, a lot of young Indians still live with their parents, and most of our parents grew up telling us that you should read books that improve your, your knowledge and learning, and you sort of read fiction after that. I'm reaching here for explanations, but
I know.
it has certainly happened over the last 3 or 4 years.
So rather than reading about dragons and ghosts and all that, you read about.
Or you read that's a separate thing altogether. The feed in from science fiction and fantasy into science is pretty strong, but definitely the room for non-fiction. The other thing I would base this on is the fact that if you talk to any bookseller, they will tell you that everything from George Gamo's 1, 2, 3 Infinity, which I read 50 years ago, to Stephen Hawking's Brief History of Time, to Kunal Ghosh's biography of Jagadish Bose, which was published like 6 months ago, everything is selling. And a lot of this is overseas editions which are being imported. The third data point I would look at here, and here I am really stepping into proprietorial territory, but wearing the other hat, not the publisher, the journalist. Look at YouTube viewer volumes on popular science channels. The Indians don't run popular science channels on YouTube. We run the IIT exam solve differential equation quickly channel, but the popular science channels, Science Magazine, Veritasium, etc., tend to get close to 25-30% of their viewers from India.
So that is another potential way for
yes, I see that
science
as
communication, to tap into science
yes,
communication.
I see that as a data point, yes, which is science communication, except that, there are people abroad eating your lunch.
So another place to get into for science writers, YouTube itself. Jahnavi, when you write, do you write for fellow scientists who know the technicality of what you're writing about? Or are you writing for a wider audience to bring them in? Who is your reader?
So when I started writing, it hurts to say I was an academic, but I really I look at my current role as sort of having exceeded that. I don't think I'm fully outside of academia yet, because we're building an institution that is closely linked to academia, but I'm no longer doing the kind of things I did for over 10 years, which was teaching, reading, writing, research, that kind of stuff, right? So when I was writing Atomic State, for example, it was very much within what academics expected to see. I had understood from examining evidence around the beginnings of experimental nuclear physics in India. I was always alert to another set of audience, which is that I was not writing only for historians of science, but I was definitely writing also for the scientists who I had interviewed for doing that work, and whose papers I was looking at. And with that, I already thought I had exceeded the possibility of an audience.
Okay.
It's after the book came out, when I had, the book comes out usually about a year after you finally bunged it in. After sending that in, I felt, or rather I realized that this wasn't quite where I wanted only to go. That wasn't the only path. And in fact, so that was the moment when I went and took, audaciously enough, classes in documentary filmmaking, and told myself that instead of writing yet another paper that 10 people will read, and 10 is an exaggerated number, I can assure you, I'll make a film.
Okay.
With the presumption, of course, that making a film was going to be easier than writing this paper. And it took me 7 years.
It was a learning experience.
It was
for
a
sure.
brilliant learning experience. I shot like a historian. I came back with lots of words, very few images, you know,
Yes.
a range of things. But I
Yes.
think making the film transitioned me, and as serendipitous.
This is your film on cyclotron.
This is my
Yeah,
film,
yeah.
which is based on the research, and it's called Cyclotron, yes. And serendipitously, at the very sort of moment, the Science Museum in London asked me if I would be willing to work with them to create an exhibition on India at the Science Museum. And so I started working, and I think that was when I really began to look at not compromising in any way the rigors of research, but taking it into the public domain
Yes, yes.
to serve a purpose which was that of informed public debate.
Yes.
And so I think now increasingly I'm agnostic about who my audience is.
All right.
I wasn't when I wrote the first book.
It was a learning curve. Now, definitely a process. Ananyo, what about you? Are you writing for people with your background in physics, your knowledge of maths, or are you writing for anybody who's interested in this?
Yeah,
this
I hope the latter. So I used to work at The Economist, as you mentioned, and The Economist imagines its readership to be the intellectually curious, and with classic marketing style, they estimate that number to be, I think, 10 million people worldwide. Now, I don't know how many of those millions are in India, but yeah, so intellectually curious people, but what does that mean? People who really want to understand at some sort of fairly deep level the world that they live in. You know, how did we end up like this? And you know, the idea that mathematics could somehow have been so important. That fascinated me, and the fact that this mathematics seemed to emanate from just this,
Okay.
a lot of this seemed to emanate from this one person was a hook. But, how successful I've been at capturing that audience, I don't know, but at least the people that have been kind enough to contact me, some of them were artists who gave up mathematics at 15, and others are kind of economists or physicists. It's been extremely popular among social scientists, and I think people in marketing and in those parts of academia, or people who are involved in that. And I think that seems to be partly because it's like all the maths that they did back when they were 18.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
sort of, oh right, yeah, this is why that stuff was kind of important. So I hope I'm reaching the general reader, and it's not just people with a strong maths background.
yes.
But I think if you've done maths to 18, you'll be in a very, very good situation to read the book. And if you quit maths at 16, then the people that I know that have read it have said, we didn't grasp all of that maths, but we understood the repercussions, and we're entertained that way. So.
Is it a hard process to write simply for the general audience without dumbing it down, without leaving out much of what you know?
Well, the thing is, this book took me to my intellectual limit, really, and the sensible thing to do when you're writing a science book is to know more than you actually put in the book, so that you can be secure in your knowledge. I didn't do that.
You went to the limit.
This book has pretty much, there are vast tracts of von Neumann I didn't even cover. The work that he did in quantum mechanics later was even more important, and it won his best friend the Nobel Prize, but he was dead by then. I didn't even touch on that because there's just too much. But I felt I'd been stretched to the limit in trying to understand it and then communicate it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope it was worth it, because it was hard.
It was hard. Devangshu, you did say there is a huge scope for whatever reason, different reasons, for non-science, for non-fiction books. If you had to put your neck out and say, we've talked about the history, science history, although it's not a biography as Ananyo insists, it's like, it's personalities, biography kind of thing. And of course you have Pranay Lal, who's not here, who's written about viruses, which is very much science content. Would you want to bet on any one of these genres in terms of sales?
Well, okay. Tony Joseph has done well with Early Indians, which is essentially about DNA and ancient North Indian versus South Indian populations. So that's done well. I think Vidya Krishnan has done well with her book on tuberculosis. I think she called it the Phantom Plague. My memory is always a little off, but yeah. Sonia Shah, who is not an Indian, I think she's London-based, has done really well with both pandemic and cholera. So again, we're coming up with biosciences which have an Indian context to them. I would say if you can bung an Indian name in there somewhere, and I'm being very cynical here, you can probably make any book on science work. For example, I mean, I've been talking to Dr. Irfan Habib and Dr. D.N. Raina, who wrote a very academic book on the history of Indian science. Because I would love to, try and persuade them to do something for a 15-year-old.
A more general audience.
Yes, assume a 15-year-old who vaguely knows something about science. I would love them to do something on that.
Okay.
I would like, I think there was an interesting lecture on Varaha Mihira, the Indian astronomer, yesterday. I would love to get somebody to actually do a book on the early mathematics that Indian astrologers, unfortunately, brought to bear on the subject.
There's a lot of maths in astrology.
Yes, and at that point of time, you really didn't have a distinction between the two.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I think, being cynical, if you can bung an Indian name in there somewhere, you can probably find an audience for a good book. It has to be a good book.
I should add that Chandrasekhar is mentioned in my book.
A quick plug.
Yeah, of course. It's C.S. Subramaniam.
So, I mean, that's interesting. So for writers, potential writers, people who are thinking, an Indian angle, you said, anything else you would be looking for in terms of?
It needs to be something that someone with a broad general education can read, or something which is engaging enough for a 12-year-old, 14-year-old. I know these sound slightly different, but the 12-year-old, 14-year-old is intellectually curious, is aware of the fact that he or she doesn't know very much about anything, and is willing to find out. Otherwise, it has to work for someone who has vaguely in the back of her head heard about concepts which he or she may not have studied after 15. Unfortunately, our education system is very rigid. You're either liberal arts or you're sciences.
You have to make a choice quite early. You have to make a choice
yes,
early.
But I would say that if you can engage someone who is, let's say, a history graduate, I'm just saying, a history graduate, and say that, well, read about Jagadish Bose because what he did and what he set up had a lot to do with the socio-economic conditions of Bengal in the 1890s, the 1900s, the connections with Vivekananda, how he fought to get things done in a colonial establishment. This would be fairly important. So I would say that you can engage at a lot of levels.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
could I add a footnote to that?
Please.
So, when I was thinking about this panel, so I've always had a slight discomfort with the word popular. It often, but then I sort of decided to take that a little further and see if it might actually work. And I thought of the film, so those of you here who've seen the film, please indulge me, Miss Congeniality, the Sandra Bullock film.
Yes.
Right? Like where you understand, I think where books about science essentially come in like Sandra Bullock into a contest where they think, well, they come in with a purpose, they don't quite belong, and they do quite something else. But like he said, they have to be engaging, they have to be entertaining, but they have to have a purpose, right? So it's I think that, I mean, they have to have, as in, I'm not saying prescriptively, but that's how they've entered sort of,
They got their foot.
market.
They got their foot in
That's
the door.
how they got their foot in, and that's how they kind of, made space in the trade book sort of, catalog by being the Sandra Bullocks, right? And so I think what it requires, like you said, the story has to be engaging, but I think, and this is what I say, that it has to be about the science. It doesn't have to be the science, right? So why does reading about this topic or this person matter? That's, I think, the most critical thing when you put out a book about anything science.
The whole context of it. What does it mean to us?
It is the context. I think that's what's matter, because otherwise you can actually go pick up a fairly scientific book, a collection of papers, and you can get what you want, talk to the person's colleagues, and if you're that interested in the science itself. But I think what books such as ours need to do is to create an interest in a sort of, in the mind of a curious person, saying, okay, why does this matter to you? Like, oh, if I read this, I understand more about the 1890s Bengal. If I read this, I understand more about why the budget, the research and development budget in India, despite being extremely low, the bulk of it goes to, say, for example, the nuclear and the space establishment.
Shadi.com. Why does Shadi.com work in terms of matching people up? Essentially, you're going back. Ananyo can explain why John von Neumann had a large impact on that.
But that, like you're saying, getting a foot in a door, but where do you draw the line? You said you were uncomfortable with the word popular.
Yes.
We've had the recent series, Rocket Boys, which certainly drew people in, but there has been criticism of the way it was popularized. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but it's, the way it was popularized, is that okay? Is it all fair in order to get people talking about this, or is there a limit?
This is a very hard call to make. I think you would have to make it on a case-by-case basis. To quote the great judge who looked at Lady Chatterley's lover and said that I cannot define porn, but I know when I see it. I would say that you have a similar take in terms of a documentary. Rocket Boys is somewhere in between being a documentary and a fictionalized account of something. So, I mean, I guess you will always get a lot of strands of stuff which you may be uncomfortable with. We are living in a place which has let's say nationalistic, a lot of people with nationalistic fervor, and they will seize on anything which, drives their agenda. So I don't know what makes you comfortable or uncomfortable here, but I would like to say that insofar as a presentation of the facts are concerned and the alignment of the facts are concerned, so long as you're doing that, I think you're okay.
Dressing it up a little bit, making it a little more catchy, it's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. I don't think that's a problem anywhere.
Devangshu, you mentioned it in passing about science fiction as a possible gateway to science writing, non-fiction science writing in terms of science fiction. Ananyo, how do you see this? Do you think science fiction is akin to science writing in the sense you have to have some basic knowledge? Can it lead people also to non-fiction, or is it a genre in itself which you love?
Well, it certainly is that. I think there is a crossover, and in fact, I'll plug my book, which isn't finished yet, but I'm writing a children's science fiction novel, which at the moment is entitled The Day the Children Disappeared, but we'll see if I get that finished. As I said, my own children are at the moment conspiring to ensure it doesn't get finished.
Make sure the book disappears.
Yeah. Yeah, they're in no danger of disappearing. but I was at a meeting of British science writers at a pub meeting in London just shortly before I got on the flight here. And actually I was approached by a guy who runs a huge science fiction book club.
Okay.
And he's really interested in getting science writers and scientists involved in these sessions that he has. And I think he said he had over 4,000 members of this book club. It was online, but now they're doing more and more events in person. And you sit around in a panel and you discuss the book. And these ideas are often there and they're useful, and in science fiction, you pick up an idea and you run with it to its logical conclusion. And in fact, von Neumann's ideas inspired two of my favorite science fiction authors. One of them was Philip K. Dick, whose first novel, The Solar Lottery, was inspired by von Neumann's game theory.
Okay.
And also Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes.
His first novel was also inspired by von Neumann, and he has a character named von Neumann in it.
Okay.
So I think they can feed off each other, but they do also, there are scientists who would never touch science fiction in their lives, but there is an overlap, and there are science fiction readers who don't like the harder end of science fiction, who like it towards the fantasy end, and so they would probably not. But there is a crossover, yeah.
There is a crossover. Jahnavi, do you think there's a crossover? Do you like science fiction?
Sometimes. I think I'm a little more old-fashioned in my reading of science fiction. So, still with Asimov and Le Guin, and haven't come very much further from there.
Don't need to go much further. They're great. They're great.
Happy to agree. So I don't. I mean, you have a very, very good empirical example of crossovers, and I'm sure we'll find more. And it's interesting to trace them, and of course, it's interesting to enjoy them. I think it might be, but I mean, there is that journey from. Not journey, the spectrum, which is fantasy, science fiction, and then other things that are sort of more informed by research, say. I think there's room for all of that, and everyone's journey, in a sense, will begin where it has to, because that's all serendipitous anyway. I call it the usual Slumdog Millionaire moments. Today is my film day, as you can tell clearly.
Absolutely.
So, something strikes you and then you follow it and you reach somewhere with it, right? And so that could be science fiction, or that could be something else, or that could be a question that bothered you because why do mosquitoes bite, him more than they bite me, or the other way around?
I'm very happy they don't bite me.
Good for you. So the starting point could be anything for anyone, right?
Yeah.
And I think science fiction could well be enjoyed without having to worry about engaging with
the facts of it, or the laws of science.
Could well be, because sometimes it doesn't quite follow. It actually sort of purports that something could happen or could have happened, and things like that. And so I think that it's fine to enjoy it.
Yes.
It's fine to also want to know more. Yeah.
I mean, like your talk of getting scientists involved in science fiction as well, that entire group, that also sounds fascinating. How does the science fiction market?
I think a lot, offhand I can think of Clark, Asimov, Larry Niven, Seshin Louis, Stanislaw Lem, Jayant Narlikar, David Brin, all working scientists who have written science fiction.
Yes.
That's a large number. And the other thing here is, I think you come back to engagement. You want to teach somebody a language or a subject or whatever, it is essential to get them reading.
Thank you for that enlightening discussion on books. I learned a lot more about science books and their variety and how they are done. And I just thought, given that you have inspired people about books, this is a good opportunity to talk about the Science Book Fellowship, which FAST is launching, right? So the basic premise is that we need more science books in India by Indian scientists, science communicators, and also topics which are relevant to India, but not limited to that. You can talk about global science. A lot of global science also happens in India and from India. So we are launching the Science Book Fellowship, which is, we've put it out here as well. You can go to the Fast India website, which is fast-india.org. We'll be supporting 3 people every year. This is the first year in writing a science book for a general purpose science book, not a textbook, for young adults, non-fiction, right? So that's the idea, and we are hoping that scientists and science communicators would get together to create these books. And our aim as FAST is that can we catalyze this ecosystem? So it's not just about the money amount is not very large, but really bring the ecosystem together, get people who want to write science books feedback on their proposals, get them mentorship through publishers to people who have written science books before, and help you. I mean, writing a book is really, really hard, right? Because I have written some books, I know, and it's a very thankless job at the end of it, right? Because only 1% books do well, kind of thing. So help them throughout that journey, right? And when I was writing my first book, I knew very little about writing science books, right? And the length of the book, how to keep your audience interested. You want to write everything, and so on. And slowly you understand, right, how to write a book which will sell, right? And probably, sir, you would know that way better than I do from the publisher's angle. So provide that help and mentorship to people at scale. And we have a very, very interesting jury. Jahnavi is on the jury as well, who's an accomplished writer. Angela Seni, who's again a very interesting writer. I've read her book, very, very famous book on how science got women wrong, right? And there were these initial science studies which said, oh, women can't do all these things, right? And it was a scientist thing that which we know is wrong, pretty much. We have Anil Seth, who's a scientist, a neuroscientist, who's written a book on consciousness, who's part of the jury. Jahnavi, I've already talked about. Pranay Lal, who's an author out of India, who's written on the natural history of India. And Professor Tarun Khanna, who's at Harvard Business School, he writes business books. So we wanted one person on the jury who can give the outside view, who's not a person of science, but who has written books. So I would encourage all of you to please look at the website. It's at fast-india.org. The applications are already open. It's open to anyone who resides in India, right? A citizen or a non-citizen can apply for this fellowship. There's some material you have to submit with a book proposal and so on, and there'll be some mentorship workshops leading to that. But to really make it successful, we need the participation of all of you and really good applications for non-fiction science books, general public science books written for adults, right? So, and all of you, we'll need your help to make this fellowship a success. So with that, please go look at the website and apply for this fellowship and so on. We have also been doing a little bit of work on science fiction, right? And so with the India Science Festival, we run this competition which is called SIS, Spin Your Science, where people can write flash fiction and submit it. It's grown and it's very, very successful. So I'll hand you guys all this copy, but I just want to show you. These are 20 science fiction stories, short science fiction stories, where we had 100+ applications and have been selected by a jury. And these been published in a booklet form out here. So this is encouraging science fiction in India, which we've been doing in a small way. But I think this can become content in its own right, which kind of goes on the web, can be published in a book, and so on. And those are some things which we have been thinking about. So even if people want to partner on making this bigger, there is a flash fiction, science flash fiction kind of competition which we run and generate this content. So please reach out to us and please apply to our science book writing fellowship if you want to write good books for everyone. Indian science stories need to be told across the globe, not just to India. And you can be writing about scientific discoveries, inventions, even stories of your own research journey, or about the history of science, right? Or stories of contemporary science in India and the world. So I look forward to get a lot of applications and please spread the word. Thank you. Thank you very much.